Right, good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Bristol Schools Forum, our first virtual meeting using the wonders of modern technology. The technology is wonderful, but it's not so wonderful that it will enable us to have the sort of interchanges that we've been used to at previous meetings. And so the process is going to require members who wish to speak to indicate electronically and be called to speak, and I anticipate that means that there'll be a little bit less toing and froing than we've been accustomed to. By way of agenda management, the principal item on our agenda is the SEND statement of action and the use of the resources that the forum conditionally agreed to transfer to the high needs block to support the actions that the authority is taking. There are two other items on the agenda, two information items, an Outturn report and a report on the Growth Fund. And the proposal there, as indicated in the note that Corinna circulated, is that members are invited to submit written comments or written questions relating to those information items. The vice chairs and I will then coordinate the preparation of some consolidated responses to those. I would urge all members of the forum to consider those items and to submit questions. They will serve as important building blocks for our consideration of the allocation of resources in the autumn for the following financial year. But to start off with, that item 1 on the agenda was welcome. That was the welcome. Item 2, forum standing business. Apologies for absence. Do we have any, Corinna?
Yes, Chris Christopher, Special Schools Governor.
Okay. Thank you. The meeting, I think, is quorate. Do we have any new appointments or resignations?
No resignations. I understand Simon Holmes, he's here, isn't he, has been reappointed as the nursery representative for another 3 years.
Congratulations, Simon. Welcome back. I look forward to your continuing trenchant contributions to our discussions. Notification of vacancies. You'll see from the agenda sheet that we still have a significant number of vacancies. So once again, could I ask you through the networks in which you participate to urge your colleagues to consider joining the forum, which has an important, as we all know, has an important role to play in the allocation of resources and the scrutiny of the education authority's use of those resources. Finally, understanding business, declarations of interest. Does any member of the forum have an interest that they feel they need to declare that hasn't previously been declared? No, thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes of our previous meeting, the meeting back in the middle of January, which feels like indeed is a long time ago. I will go through the, well, first, can we accept the draft that has been circulated as an accurate record? Perhaps the simplest way would be to ask if any member has any corrections to make, if they could indicate a desire to speak. No, so let us take that as accepted as an accurate record. Matters arising, there are a number flagged up among the minutes. I will work through those and then invite members of the forum to raise any other matters arising. On the minute 3 on page 3 of the pack of papers, we discussed the minimum funding guarantee and referred that for further discussion by the finance subgroup, which hasn't met since the last meeting of the forum. I anticipate that the group will be convened during the summer holidays as we receive information from the DfE about future funding levels, and we will make sure that the minimum funding guarantee is included on the agenda for that discussion. At the last meeting, Chris Pring also raised a question about the availability of guidance for the use of the HR system, which I think Denise was going to follow up. Has there been any progress on that? No? Chris?
Had forwarded the details that were requested. If not, then let me know and I will follow up.
There was some details that did come through. It wasn't the guidance that I'd expected, and to be honest, we've moved now, so it doesn't make an issue for us.
Okay, so we'll treat that item as closed. Thank you. Minute 4 on page 5 of the pack, it was agreed that the slides relating to early years funding that were displayed would be circulated, and that happened. Minute 6 on page 6, there was a request for some further information about the details of high needs spending, and I think that's been incorporated in the Outturn report, which Graham has included in the papers for this meeting. Minute 7, item 8, we requested a further report on the use of the funds to be transferred for the high needs block, and that is the substance of items 4 and 5 on our agenda this afternoon. And finally, minute 9 on page 10, Alison, to consider the composition of the forum for the future. I think, given developments that have taken place since the forum meeting, forum members will understand that this has not been at the top of office's agenda, and so the proposal now is that we should return to the issue at the start of the next academic year. Are there any other matters arising from the minutes? Chris?
Yes, Crew. It's on minute number 3, which was the with regards to the TWS income and expenditure breakdown.
Right.
So we Karina sent that out after the last meeting, so that's absolutely fine. But I think that the key to this is that this needs to be presented when the annual report is presented, because there are several questions in there as to why one particular area is making over almost £250,000. Another area is making a deficit of nearly that amount. And I think that's when the questions need to be posed, is to what is going on there, especially as the area that's making £250,000 is the area which was then in benefit, if you like, of the £1.3 million transfer.
Right, so the fair questions arising from the information that's been circulated. I think I'll propose that the vice chairs and I consider how we can best incorporate that into the work programme for the forum. Have a look at what timing would be most appropriate, but I will make sure that we return to the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other matters arising? No? In which case, I think we can proceed to the SEND reports, and over to you, Alison, to introduce them.
Right, thanks, Carew. There's two items on the agenda that are intrinsically linked. The first one is an update with regard to the written statement of action, and I was hoping that we would have an update from Ofsted CQC regard to any changes, formal changes with time scale or any formal response to the COVID crisis that we're in at the moment, and to use to give an update. We were anticipating that coming out, hence a separate item on the agenda. That hasn't come through at the moment, but I'm very happy to give just a very quick verbal update, just in terms of where we are with it, given the situation we're in at the moment. So in terms of the written statement of action, we received the confirmation that the action plan was fit for purpose, and that has now been published and is available on the local offer. It was also sent to all school leaders through the bulletin. Just to reassure you that the written statement of action absolutely remains a key priority for us at the council, and we're really working hard to safeguard this work against the key milestones. And there are obviously a number of key milestones, given that there were 5 very in-depth areas of weakness that we have to address over the next 18 months. That work is taking place at the moment, and as I say, we are making sure that we are not redeploying or redirecting any of those critical service areas that are delivering against those milestones in terms of COVID activity. There are obviously going to be some of those July milestones which are going to be harder to deliver. Fortunately, a lot of the work had already started, and certainly some of the key activities around co-production sessions with Senkos took place before the lockdown. So we were able to move forward in terms of the July milestones, and enabling us to stay on track for some of it. There's obviously going to be some that are more challenging to deliver for July, and we're just working through what those are in detail, and obviously that will provide the basis of our report to the DFE in July, which I'm assuming will be a virtual meeting if it is going ahead, and certainly the basis of the update that we'll provide our communities through the local offer. Obviously some areas relating to pressures to respond to frontline work for COVID, particularly thinking about colleagues in health, as they obviously have significant pressures through their sector. But certainly in terms of the analysis of those milestones so far, we're at about 50%, just over 50% have already been achieved, and obviously we're looking in detail at the milestones that are either sort of RAG rated amber, as in we need to think of a creative way to overcome some of the barriers, or those that are red and not able to be delivered through this current climate. And I'm thinking particularly obvious ones are going to be possibly some of the co-production work. We need to think creatively about how we develop that through this period with our families and young people. But also obvious issues with the fact that technically schools are closed. So if we think about some of those priorities in priority 4 related to attendance of children and young people with SEND, that isn't necessarily the milestone in there, isn't necessarily the one that we can deliver against for July. There's also various updates on the local offer. The local offer has been refreshed, and we are updating information as we progress. The document that's about to go up is the You Said We Did document. That's going to be uploaded over the coming days, and really that is an overview of how parents and carers have shaped the local offer, and hopefully is quite an interesting tool. We also did a lot of collaborative work with school leaders and Senkos in order to ensure that the voice of schools were also present through that. So I think probably in terms of any other formal update, that's all I've got for the moment. But I thought it was a good time to just let you know where we are with it. And I think the important message for us is that in terms of delivering, we really are seeking to safeguard and protect that work as we move forward. I don't know, do you want me to carry on into the next one, Carew, or shall I pause and take any questions from the floor?
I think you might as well carry on at this point, Alison.
Okay, so the next agenda item is the one that was requested in the previous Schools Forum meeting, which was really understanding the detail of the impact and the milestones that we would be seeking to deliver through the 1.3 million transfer from to the high needs block. And there's obviously been a breakdown of various finances on this, but I think what you were particularly asking for was to understand the impact and thinking about and understanding what that means in terms of what will be different, and also how as a Schools Forum you can absolutely hold us to account in terms of where we've prioritised and being able to measure those against those milestones. So this really does speak to a lot of the work that's in the written statement of action and ensuring that the milestones follow the same time frame. So the milestone reporting that I'm proposing that we do is July for the first one, November, and then March 2021. And that will be absolutely in line with the reporting that we will be putting in place to the department. And so that will support the evidence that we're collecting at that time for Schools Forum. So I thought what I'd just do, you've obviously all got a copy of it, is just bring some of the text to life slightly and really try and think, get you to understand in terms of what that might mean for the schools and settings that you're representing and also for our families. So there are three priorities that this funding really speaks to in the written statement of action. And the first one is priority 2. And what we're hoping to achieve and seeking to achieve through this is really making sure that the children and young people with SEND receive the best possible, appropriate and effective support and provision at the right time. And it's that timeliness element that's really important here. So just in terms of the identified activity and the timeline. So the first part of this really is about developing an effective front door for our families in regard to SEND. We've called it a first call service, so it really is about bringing that local offer to life. So having a team in place to be available to our parents and carers who are either have ongoing concerns or don't know where to go for particular support, so the signposting, but also to be there when a family start becoming concerned about SEND or start having concerns about their child's development or whatever it is that's related or a recent diagnosis. Absolutely having a team in place that will be there to support and answer questions rather than it being something that comes far later down the line and requires some sort of statutory process. So this really will be a test and learn piece. We don't know what it needs to look like longer term, but we certainly know that we need to front load this and make sure that we have the right staff available who can support and be there for families in the first instance. So this is going to be our front door service, as I said, but it will shape what that longer term offer looks like for our families across Bristol. What that will do is then support the schools and settings as well to have another place for the families to go to understand what is available more broadly across our locality and not just in that school or setting. Moving on down to the schools and settings, the next part is really about the support system for education and the training and skills that is required right the way across Bristol. So all of these elements really is focused on the early identification and intervention, and it's about resetting that skills baseline across the city and making sure that every school and setting and all of those that work in it absolutely understand some fundamentals when it comes to supporting our children and young people in a school and setting with SEND. So it's not just about the statutory responsibilities, although that is obviously part of it, and understanding how to deliver the code of practice and the statutory framework within a school or setting, but it's really about enhancing ordinary available provision and understanding what that can look like and how effective that can be for children and young people. An element of this about the training is really about raising that competency level and having, I used the word baseline earlier, it's about having a starting point that is higher than the one we're at the moment when it comes to supporting key needs within schools. So it's making sure that we haven't just invested in the SENCO or the inclusion manager or a very small group of staff who hold the knowledge and capabilities to effectively support a wide range of needs within mainstream settings. It's about really making sure that the understanding and is across all staff, and that the offer across every school is equitable, and the skills and knowledge across every school has raised in terms of being able to support that wide range of children and young people. So we're really focusing a lot of that first training on needs such as autism, social, emotional, mental health, and also cognition and learning, and really thinking, as I say, about making sure that our core offer are ordinarily available is of a higher standard than we have as a city. So there's great practice across many schools, but just in terms of that baseline as a city, it's making sure that we're all starting from the same level, and that the experience that our children and young people will get in our schools is improved. Just moving.
Shall we pause to
Yes.
see whether there are any questions or comments about the measures relating to priority 2? But before that, or to help with that, Alison, it might be helpful if you could expand a little bit on the extent to which the money transferred from the schools block is enabling you to do things that wouldn't otherwise be possible under this heading.
Yes, certainly. So really this is about investing in new teams. It's about investing in training programs that we would provide free to all schools and settings. So at the moment, there's obviously a lot of the training that's available requires purchasing either from the local authority, from providers across the city, or external providers. What this is about is really investing that funding in making sure that schools and settings have the access to the training that we would want every school and setting to have in place, and those skills that would be provided free. It's about making sure that we have the staff to drive forward some of the work, particularly in relation to the early intervention and identification, supporting and working with SENCO. So this is really about significantly increasing capacity in education and skills in order to deliver this. And obviously some of these pieces of work are going to be test and learn, such as the first call, but actually in order to do that, and in order to know what that service needs to be going forward, we need to put in new staff that are going to be available to families. And so really all of this is about the capacity and the staffing to do something very, very different.
Right, thank you for that. So can we then open up the elements of the statement of action relating to priority 2 for comment or questions from members of the forum? Aileen.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much, Alison. That's really, really helpful to have that in so much detail and the written statement of action to go through. And I really welcome the range of developments that have been proposed, especially in the work and communicating with parents. That's a really huge step forward, and I think that'll change the perception of the services a huge amount for the parents and pupils. I think I've got a couple of questions just about how this is happening. So how is the local authority ensuring that the specialist sector within the city is being involved in the development of the staff expertise within mainstream settings? So, you know, is the good practice that's already in the city being used to inform other settings? And how's the LA ensuring the quality of provision and the value for money when it's commissioning services, particularly from, you know, sometimes there are wonderful courses that are advertised, but actually they don't deliver something that's really tailored for the needs of the city.
Yeah, thanks. Just to pick up those two, I think just to work in reverse order, the quality is it's not about throwing money at the problem. It's about absolutely making sure that we identify the right training that's going to have the biggest impact. And if you look online, there's a whole, as you know, there's a whole industry made out of this. What we will need to do, and it will obviously be led by colleagues in everything from educational psychology to SEND support and beyond, and school partnerships. It's to absolutely make sure that we identify the right programs that will have the biggest impact, and that's already being built up at the moment. I know there's been quite a lot of discussions with SENCOs and staff in schools to identify the areas that would have the biggest impact. We also then have the richness of information that's come back from parents and carers through the survey and from young people themselves in terms of what their experience is in schools or settings in terms of what training might need to be in place. Then moving on, I think we absolutely want to move into a model across Bristol where we're really utilising the skills that we have. I don't think anybody's sitting here thinking that all of this sits with the local authority in terms of delivering the training and what will have the biggest impacts. You know, I really see our role very much as facilitators of this. Actually, there's a lot of expertise out in schools, there's a lot of expertise out in other organisations, and particularly some of the accredited training sitting with national charities that we would want to engage in, and some key partners that we would want to work with in the field of education. So I see this really about identifying those core priorities and then really thinking about where we know that programs has been delivered, that we can evidence that it has had an impact, and using that evidence-based approach, as well as knowing what's had an impact in our local schools and settings, and thinking about how we can roll that out either within a locality or more widely across the city.
Is that okay, Aileen? Great, thanks. Chris Pring and then Christine.
Hi, Corinne, thank you. Yeah, so Alison, from looking through here, there's just a few things that I, probably from a data point of view, is where I'm coming from, is how will we measure how successful this particular area has been? I know it says increase in the percentage of parents reporting, but will there be other KPIs that will be used to identify the success of this particular area? You know, you mentioned about training courses and things like that, so uptake on that or anything along those lines. And one of the other things, in March 21 on the first action point, it says that come this time next year, sustainable funding will be secured. Is that also a risk then that it doesn't get secured, and what happens to that part of the project if it's not secured? And from a final point of view, and this will probably apply across all the improvement priorities, is, and I think you mentioned it in the outset, can this be costed, if you like, is how our 1.3 million pounds has been attributed to this particular project, so that in a year's time we can see whether it's actually made a tangible difference.
Yep. Again, reverse order. That's exactly what we'll do. So we'll have some sort of financial overlay to that reporting as we move forward as well, so you can absolutely see what's against each of those areas. In terms of the measures of success, this is just a high-level overview for the purpose of this meeting. Sitting behind is not only a detailed action plan, but also a number of KPIs against each of these. I propose that we find a way that, in terms of the reporting on against those milestones, we somehow sort of funnel the breadth of information that we'll be providing to the DFE and CQC down into something that's manageable from a schools forum perspective. And we can work through what that might look like, but it would certainly be evidence-based. If you take the training, it might be the numbers of attending, feedback, and so on. Just an example, in terms of the first call, it's likely to be volume of calls, nature of calls, satisfaction rates following support from that team, and so on. So we'll absolutely make sure that is part of the reporting going forward. And then the point about further funding, yes, there is a risk. A lot of this pieces of work is based on sort of one-off funding, and really identifying through a test and learn programme what we need to have going forward. It may not look the same as we needed this year, because obviously we are at you know a significantly difficult position with SEND across the city. There is a huge amount to do. Whether that is what is needed longer term, I think is something that will be is absolutely part of the work that we're doing, and we'll identify that as we go. So there is always a risk with the one-off funding in this, but I'm hoping that we use this really intelligently. We'll get a sense of what that longer term finance needs to look like from a budget perspective.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks. Christine.
Hello, everybody. So I've got I've got a couple of high-level questions and then a couple of questions relating specifically to the priority 2. So it's 3 million is the total investment for the whole written statement of action, and this is 1.3 of the mainstream schools putting into that. So my first question is, the other 1.7, where is that funding coming from? I've looked at the statement of action, the governance diagram. School Forum is a considerable commissioner of the work, and it's not mentioned on the area send governance diagram, and I'm wondering why that is, because I'm assuming we're probably the biggest single commissioner of the work. And then in relation to priority 2, how does the first call send system that the authority is wanting to put together differ from the service that supportive parents are offering in relation to SEN support for families? And why is it that the authority has confidence that, given the Ofsted report, parents will use this service as opposed to putting more funding into supportive parents who, but maybe what you're doing is different. That's why I'm asking that question. And is some of this funding, given that it's about training up SENCOs and enabling schools to understand pretty bread and butter stuff really around kind of SEN support, is that where you're seeing some of this funding from the mainstream being used so that that input and that improvement can be done in the areas of the mainstream schools?
Okay, I'll work back from that and probably hand over to Graham for the finance one that you started with. So if I work back through, I mean, although you use the comment that it's sort of fundamental stuff. It is, but it's the investment right the way across the city in terms of ensuring that everybody gets the same experience and the training, I think is really important. I think what schools and settings, and you know, from my own experience being in schools, what tends to happen is you have a churn of staff, and that expertise goes out as staff leave, and so what you end up with is a very fragmented approach unless you have a really clear and effective internal CPD to tackle this. I think also research changes and what is effective practice change. So even though it might feel fundamental, actually being able to do the basics and understand the basics and then build up an enhanced offer from that, and building those sort of, you know, experience and champions within a school, but actually increasing that baseline is really important. It absolutely has to be part of our mainstream provision, because it informs that graduated approach and the ability to effectively assess, plan, do, review. So that transfer into mainstream is really an important one. In terms of the governance, I will take that away. I don't know the answer to that one in terms of whether it has a place in there or not, and what the rules and regs are around the formal governance. But I absolutely take your point, Christine. You know, if this transfer and release of the funding is approved, then obviously that's a big part of it. Stepping one back from that, in terms of your questioning with regard to the rest of the funding, the 3 million in total, before I hand over to Graham, who might be able to break it down a little bit more, is also to support the wider education transformation programme, not just a written statement of action. So there's also a number of pieces of work that aren't necessarily directly related to SEND, but probably more broadly related to some of the inclusion agendas that we do see in the written statement of action. So Graham, I don't know, do you want to just give a detail in terms of where the funding's coming from that?
Yeah, there was there's the 1.3 million from the schools forum contribution from the schools block into the high needs block. 1.5 million has been allocated from the general fund, 500,000 each year for the next 3 years. and then the balance is coming from a couple of unused reserves, which we're going to draw down on to make up the £3 million.
Apologies, colleagues. Can I just come in on that just to correct Graham's statement? It's not actually from core general fund, because as many of you are aware, we're not able to utilise general fund to support deficits. It's from some additional funding that the council has and has set aside to be able to support the initiatives.
Okay, and those sources of funds, as Alison said, or just to check, are supporting the education transformation programme as a whole. Not it's not all being devoted to the SEND programme.
Correct.
Excellent. So we have it earmarked for Alison to deliver a transformation programme for education and to actually design a programme that can be contained within the total £3 million that's been earmarked, including the 1.3 that Schools Forum have agreed to contribute.
Thank you. Simon Holmes.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just kind of echoing a little bit, I think, what Eileen said, and looking at all of this. Yeah, great. But from experience, I've often noticed like a lot of these big training programs in to raise everyone across the city kind of thing. It's often, you know, and you'll get a toolkit and then no one has the time to read it. Or there's a lot of stuff that is just repetitive or people already know, and it's a kind of one size fits all. Whereas I think there's a lot, say, and I think very much in the early years, there's a lot of people who are working every day with these families, with these children, who have a lot of expertise. And I think a kind of more, or if it's possible, to have a kind of co-constructed training program where existing skills and knowledge in the city, which, as you've said, you know, there's a lot of it out there that is really good. And sometimes like a kind of outside package coming in can seem rather kind of patronizing, often very expensive, and doesn't actually hit the targets we need and use the people that we have. And I think what's become more and more clear, partly as a result of this crisis we're in, is how important it is on the ground in local areas to have people who can respond in the communities with some kind of autonomy. And we need to develop more and more of that. So I think that this is possibly an opportunity to do that. And my other concern in all of this, as you're saying, is I'm sure it's the same in many schools, and it's certainly the same in nurseries. I mean, we've just had to end fixed term contracts for 6 staff who work with our children with the greatest needs. Often the staff working with the most complex children are the lowest paid and with the most insecure work contracts, because we're chasing funding. The funding's only for a fixed term, and then we have to reapply for funding. We train staff up and then lose those skills, and the whole thing, it's actually more expensive to do it that way than to have a kind of stable funding which trains staff and keeps them, so that there's proper contracts for the people that are working with these complex children. So that's just my contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. And yeah, I really appreciate comments on both of those. And I think in terms of what it's going to look like in detail, I think it's going to be a mix of a lot of different things. So it's going to be everything from some mass training to absolutely know that we've got to be confident that the offer our children and young people get in each school and setting has a certain standard, and that's really important, and that we need to know that across the city, and that isn't necessarily evident at the moment. But building on from that, so that's only one part of it, building on from that, it is absolutely about looking at what practice we have out there, both in the city and beyond, and targeting specific training and coaching as well. So it's not just about coming in and doing and leaving a toolkit. I've have also been in those positions. So it's not necessarily the most effective way of implementing, but it is about the coaching and thinking about doing it differently and trying to model and create a sustainable system within each school or clusters of schools. So I think it's about absolutely co-producing it, taking the evidence that we have, identifying programs that will work, but also, as you say, really utilising the expertise we have across all of our schools and settings.
Okay. Christine, sorry, apologies. I should have come back to you for any supplementaries.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just I didn't the question about the first call as opposed to supportive parents and why the authority chose to bring that in-house, and what you see the difference being, and why you chose not to enhance the service that supportive parents has provided for very, very many years in the city, and choose to bring it in-house.
Sorry, Christine, I knew I'd missed one out when I went back through. Yeah, in terms of the service, this really is about trying to support in a different way the number of the calls that we get into the council, obviously concerns that we have from families that they are more supports required. It really is about bringing that local offer to life, working with colleagues across health, education, care, signposting, and supporting parents and being out working, and engaging with parents in a very different way than we're able to at the moment as a council. I'll take away the question about enhancing the other service, but certainly this is about making sure that as a front door for SEND, as a local authority, as a council or locality, that it's very much a central point that then almost triages into a lot of the services that sit in the council. So it's adding a slightly different element to maybe some of the other support networks for parents and carers. This very much is about delivering the council responsibility on this, locality responsibility on this.
Okay, or do you want to follow up, Christine?
Yeah, it's on the governance, it's on the finance. So am I correct then that health are not investing in this and social care are not investing in this? It's the education mainstream and council. And I go back again then to that governance question, because the CCG are on the governance structure, and health is a large contributor to children that have education and healthcare plans.
So yeah, so this what we pulled out for this, the actual transfer is the elements of this that education are directly responsible for and will be delivering. Obviously, there's a huge amount of other pieces of work that absolutely is co-owned with care and health that are independently funded by them as well.
Is it worthwhile just pointing out, if the council are making a contribution, that could almost also be seen as care and education. We don't disaggregate the two. So I don't think it's not quite accurate to say that care or social care isn't making a contribution. So the council decides how it prioritises any of the resources it has available to it. I think really the key point is more the point that Alison has mentioned in terms of health engagement in the overarching agenda, and whether or not they're able to pool any resources to support it.
Okay. Ruth Pickersgill.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered around, it's back to the training question, and certainly I know that I've learned far more than from going on courses, from actually watching specialist teachers in practice doing what they're doing. And a model that was around years ago that worked really well was having special school classes in mainstream settings with the specialist teachers, which then allowed the mainstream teachers to observe how they worked and develop lots of practice in the school. And I think maybe a model of a more creative model around how we improve the skills in schools would be really useful. And I noticed in the paper later the projected vacancies in primary schools and spaces would mean it would be an ideal time to be planning to be having specialist classes with specialist teachers in mainstream schools that could be far more inclusive and more flexible and everything else. And we don't seem to be addressing the whole issue of the flexibility of the provision that's available in this plan, really.
Again, Ruth, yeah, I think the creativity around the training offer is going to be hugely important. And then just on the last point, the specialist provision, I think I'll come on to talk about that a bit later, and that's exactly what we're looking to do, look at how we increase specialist provision across all our schools and settings, and that includes mainstream as well, and thinking of ways that we could achieve that both for the short term and longer term. Repurposing of some of the space that we have available as we've seen that bulge go down is absolutely part of that plan.
Shall we go on then to priority 4 items? I mean, not to close down any further comments or questions on priority 2 if they occur to members of the forum, but perhaps Alison, you could now take us through the priority 4 measures.
Certainly. So priority 4 is really focused on the inclusion of children and young people with SEND across our schools and settings. And so it's really looking to ensure that we have the resources in place, and that we have the structures and systems to improve areas such as attendance, and making sure that children and young people are able to attend their setting, their mainstream setting. So there are a number of obviously milestones and measures against that. And this is obviously going to be one that I think is likely to be challenging given the current circumstances with regard to the attendance strategy. I know that obviously there's a lot of work that had already started that hasn't necessarily been paused, but we need to think about how we drive that forward in a different way. The big part of this is really thinking about our 14 to 25 work that we do. And so if you turn to page 15, I'll just talk you through the first 3 particularly on there. We've got a focus on the 14 to 25 with regard to those positive destinations. So that's really a sort of overarching sort of ambition sitting above it. There's historically, there's obviously a designated responsibility for 19 to 25, and historically, in terms of the destinations and really supporting those young people into either further education or careers, this has been an area that hasn't been monitored as rigorously as you would want. So it's about this first 2 pieces of work, both in terms of the data tracker and the participation worker, is all about really identifying who those children are, and making sure that we absolutely dig down into each individual circumstance for them, and then provide the support in order to identify the next step in their schooling and steps into career. So it's the targets around this are about making sure that by March 2021, we've currently got 633 young people that make up that cohort, that every one of them are known, and that the destination is recorded, or that the EHCP is ceased. So it's about moving up from unknown through to known, neat, or closing a case. So we absolutely are able to target the support effectively. That's a piece of work, a big piece of work that needs to take place over the coming months. When we then move down into the participation worker, this is about supporting, as I say, supporting directly with that young person and thinking about what those career paths are going to be, and implementing the coaching. So again, looking at an ambition of certainly having that by the March 21, 50 young people have been supported to progress into training or employment, and obviously working back from that, we're starting from a standing position at the moment of being able to effectively move up, and then we can think about again how we scale that up and continue to provide that as part of the ongoing offer. The third one down is to do with the Works project, which some of you may know and have been involved in. And this is all about partnerships with schools and education settings to really embed that career development. We are targeting 14 to 16-year-olds through this, because what we know and understand, and this also includes alternative learning, PRUs, hospital education, that 16 is too late to start doing this work. So this really is about stepping into that space 2 years earlier than we would now, and raising the aspiration and really thinking about that career development for our young people. So far work has started on this, and we brought in employers to support customised offers, and also given COVID, we're in the process of developing this service online so that we can actually maintain the service through COVID. So this is an example where the milestones and the ability to deliver this could potentially be impacted by the situation we're in at the moment, but we're finding creative ways to work around that so we can still provide that offer for our young people. And again, you'll see some aspirational figures in terms of those milestones. And then the final one, I think, in that section, this is really just picks up on Ruth's comments earlier with regard to the specialist provision. So we know as a city we do not have enough specialist provision spaces across our city. I think we have two elements to this. We have a short-term element that is about those children, young people who require a placement now, or certainly for September, through to a longer term strategy that really thinks about the principles of what we're trying to achieve in the city. So an example of that might be trying to identify and invest and create resource that means that a young person can stay within the community that they live, rather than the sort of transport from one end of the city to another. That's just an example, and that's obviously the strategy will be something that would absolutely be co-produced with all of our stakeholders and partners as we move forward. But the short-term issue is obviously the pressing one, and that's about making sure that we identify how we can increase specialist provision, both in terms of special schools and also in terms of mainstream. So just going back to the comment I made earlier to Ruth, the work has started in identifying where we may be able to increase and do something differently than we have at the moment. So we've engaged our schools and settings and looked at how we can identify short-term solutions, small capital builds, the things that we can deliver for September and really increase our offer. So some of the work with regard to the mapping exercises and understanding what the current need is has already taken place. It's obviously been impacted in terms of any feasibility on-site feasibility studies, but as we move forward, we can create a shortlist and see what we can do in order to increase capacity for September. But the real thrust of this is to looking at investing in that long-term strategy.
Okay, thank you for that. So again, open to comments or questions from members of the forum on the inclusion and specialist provision elements of the package. Ruth again, and then Aileen.
Just on the post-16, I think they're all really good ideas, and I think I welcome them all. But on the post-16, if you've got one person working with 600 young people, but it looks like they're going to have, the target is they work with 50, is that really enough of a resource? And is anyone else contributing to that? Because the post-16, the post-16 providers as well are part of this. And I know the school, I know the way the schools forum we ended up in the high needs mess because of post-16 funding, but it just feels though they need more resource within their settings, as well as us trying to, put more and more people in the local authority to try and work with the young people.
I think it's about both as well, and it's definitely a partnership model that will make this effective. So some of the work will be through existing teams and through existing capacity within either the local authority or certainly, as you say, in thinking about how we engage post-16 providers. But in terms of how we achieve these particular numbers from where we are now, that is about increased capacity. And so it's not necessarily one person doing the whole thing, but it's about identifying if we increase capacity here and here and here, we can actually start getting to the understanding, the gaps that we have and making sure that we absolutely know and have sight of every single young person within that age range in terms of those career destination education, employment training or not, but also making sure that we can front load that support so that we can actually reach more children, young people, more young people more quickly. But again, I think a lot of this, back to the point that this is, a lot of this is one-off funding. What we will learn through this, and what part of the piece of work needs to happen, is what does that need to look like earlier. So we've got to invest in additional resource in order to get ourselves into a better position to understand how that is then resourced for the longer term.
Okay, Aileen.
I really welcome that. I think the more support for transition into post-16 for SEN is, it's obviously going to be really positive for the young people. I think you referred to the current situation, and I think what we're all experiencing is increased anxiety, increased worry in our school population, and for our current year 11s, and particularly those disadvantaged and those with SEN, the transition is going to be so much more difficult this year. And while somebody from outside might offer support, our young people tend to work with people with whom they've established a relationship, and would really welcome some investment in some school initiatives to support into post-16. Currently, my designation is only to 16, and we don't have any funding post-16, but I know that my staff will continue to work with some of our young people into their post-16 placements in order that they're a success. But unfortunately, we can't do that with no funding whatsoever. And I'm sure small amounts of funding spread out amongst the APs, the SEN providers, and available to mainstream with SEN pupils would go a long way to supporting young people and using the strength of the relationships they've already built up.
Thanks, Aileen, for that. I'll absolutely, I've made a note of it, I'll take it away. I think the whole issue of transition is beyond this now, given where we are, and certainly it was one of 3 very meaty discussions at the Excellence in Schools group, the Bristol City Standards Board on last week. I think it was Wednesday last week. So that is a piece of work that absolutely needs longer discussions, full coordination, and really thinking about how we protect those that already find it difficult to transition at the best of times, but really thinking about how we hold those young people at the centre of the decisions that we make on that. And that may come with additional funding or certainly resource to do something differently this year in response to COVID.
Okay, thanks. Chris Pring.
Yeah, it's just with regards going back to the if you like, the impact measures. I think these sort of lend themselves to really good KPIs to measure, etc. But one of the things, perhaps it's in line anyway, is whilst we're looking to measure against our statistical neighbours, will we also be measuring ourselves against previous? So, measure against the last year, the year before, that kind of stuff, to see how we've progressed as an authority, even if we haven't. I'm assuming maybe the statistical neighbours have got better records than us, but we might not have reached that goal, but we've actually reached an improvement goal on what we had previously.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Chris. And it's sort of getting the detail behind those key milestones, I think, is really important, and demonstrating progress against the position we were in, whether that was 6 months ago, 2 years ago. I think it's really important to look at all of the different factors. So to look at national performance, to look at statistical neighbours, but also to recognise where there has been improvement from the position we were in previously as a local authority, because that is, for some of these headlines, it's going to take a long time to demonstrate that we're in line with national, we're in line with statistical neighbours, but we've got to have a really intelligent measuring whether or not we're on track, and that will be certainly looking at our previous performance as a local authority.
Okay, is that all right, Chris? Fine. Well, at this point, I've got no further questions on, or nobody else flagging up questions for priority 4. So perhaps, Alison, you can take us on to priority 5.
Yep, so priority 5 really is about the parents and carers having a positive experience of our SEND system and the whole written statement of action. There's a lot of detail in that in terms of changing how parents and carers experience the system. This particular piece of work from the funding looks at the local offer. So work has already started, but this is a really, really important a front door and portal for our work with parents and carers. And so this is all about co-producing the local offer website, which, as I say, is already underway, but ensuring information is available, that it's timely, that it adds value to our families. And so this particular one is really just identifying the milestones behind that. There's already been obviously a lot of co-production that's taken place and a lot of conversations and discussions about what that local offer should be. So with the improved local offer and the information on that, plus the first call, bringing that to life in real time for our families and supporting them through the systems and processes, and also having transparent information on there and transparent updates on there that means that we are sharing our progress with regard to SEND, I hope will go some way to increasing confidence.
Right. Any comments or questions from members of the forum? Christine.
Thank you, Carew. Mike, this was probably before your time, Alison, but the authority did have a specific post for an officer that developed the local offer when, whenever it was 2014 or whenever it was. This is short-term funding. Is that correct? Yes. The local offer is always going to be needed to be updated. And so my question is about, once this is done, how does the authority plan to ensure that that work is embedded within the SEN department in the council and therefore continues to happen, and we don't get 18 months down the line and it needs to be done again?
Yeah, really good point. This is the local offer post is still there, so that hasn't gone away. This is about investing in the improvements, in the digital improvements, in the ability to run the sessions, the identification of the key needs. So it's very much a project piece as opposed to a longer term sustainability. So again, it's a front loaded investment that means we make the improvements, and then those that are currently in post can have a chance to actually manage it rather than trying to do everything and the day job sort of thing.
Okay, Christine. Dave Yorath. You're still muted, Dave.
No, I don't know how to do it.
There we are. We can hear you now.
Can you? Oh,
yep.
Good. Yes, the funding that we're talking about here it seems to be time limited from both our contribution and the authority's contribution. But a lot of what we're talking about seems to last longer than the time limit of the funding, and seem to be rather more permanent in nature than temporary one-off hits. And I'm just wondering if I'm reading that right, or am I not?
Denise, do you want to jump in there, or do you want me to pick that one up?
I think that's absolutely correct in terms of the funding envelope. That's the area that's been earmarked. I think the approach that Christine has outlined is more, sorry, that Alison's outlined is more of a test and learn. We've always recognised that there are some areas where we're not maybe spending or acting as in an efficient way. We need to actually have a look at the overarching plan as we then move forward, and the design for the services, and which areas we believe are more efficient to actually continue to invest in. So there will still need to be, a full whole-scale review, but hopefully it's done with an evidence base, driven from the data and the information collated in this earlier phase. That's what I'm expecting from a test and learn proposition, and that at some point we will all come back to sort of say which are the areas that have proved effective that we'd want to continue on, and then consider what's the funding sources that are available in order to do that.
Okay, Dave. You're muted again.
Oh, sorry. That's right. No, that answers my question. So you can see that there is some ongoing stuff here that is not funded going forward after the period of the funding that we're putting in.
Yeah. Chris Pring.
Yeah, sorry, it's me on improvement impact measures again, and this time. Just a quick question. So where it says findings from quality insurance activity will demonstrate an ongoing improvement, do we currently measure those areas?
No, that will be new. So part of it as well is to create a really robust quality assurance framework. Again, that's happening at the moment, and there will be areas that we will not have previous data for, and some of the data that we would have as a starting point is possibly softer than we would want, but we need to find a way to demonstrate progress against that, but there will be gaps.
Okay, thank you.
Alison, your report also refers to, I think, 3 specific packages of work relating to autism, transition and school SEN support. Do you want to say anything about them?
Yes, they're really just, it sort of goes back to Aileen's comment about the fact, and Simon, that there will be other elements that will come out of this as the co-production starts. So what we've really done is we've just identified three funding sources, or funding for 3 programs. At the moment, from the information that we've had, it seems to lend itself to autism, Key Stage 2 to 3, and then the school SEN support. But actually, we may find that they need to be new areas. The reason they're so vague at the moment is these really, to get the best impact from it, these really do have to be co-produced with our schools and settings.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments or questions from members of the forum on specific items or on the proposals as a whole? Okay, well, thank you for the report, Alison, and I think you've held out the prospect of milestone reports to come to forum and others, no doubt, in the course of the year. It seems, and you've said that you'll take away a number of the questions that were raised. It seems to me that there have been some recurring themes around co-production, question then of who's actually involved in the co-production, how broad the range of inputs is, the effectiveness, how effectiveness is to be assessed, and sustainability. And I hope that the milestone reports will it'll be possible to develop them to address those issues along with all of the other ones. Yep. If there are, right, Chris again, Chris Pring.
Sorry, yeah, I came in a bit late, couldn't get my button pressed there. It was just one of the things really with the overall package in terms of, making the transfer, because that's obviously the recommendation and things like that. I would say that what's in the package looks good and looks, worthwhile. But if we were to rag status at the moment, I'd say we were still on amber, because there's a lot of other things need to happen in order for this to come to fruition. So whilst I think it's a reasonable idea to transfer that funds, it has to go with a kind of a caveat that we are taking a bit of a risk.
Alison, would you like to comment on that?
Only that I would say that in terms of the areas that have been identified and the detail sitting behind it, this is from the written statement of action, which obviously has a lot more detail, which you know, we can provide through the milestone reporting, and it's the areas identified that have been ratified and approved by Ofsted and CQC. So I would potentially challenge it's less of a risk than it would appear in terms of the high level summary. It's gone through huge amounts of rigorous governance to get to this point.
It works normally just adding to that, which is really just indicating that actually the funding is transferred into a programme. It's a programme within the high needs budget area, and not just added to the high needs budget itself. So it would enable you to fully report on that, carry it forward if necessary, if not spent. So you can manage it across financial years, but then you can report appropriately in terms of milestones and deliverability, but also gives Alison some of the delegated authority to make the commitments against it. So I think it will still give you clear transparency and no risk that it's just consumed within the wider high needs budget unless it's appropriate to do so. So I think it should give you some confidence to still transfer the funds. It can be a separate line contained within the general monitoring report and reported on as we would do any programme or project, etc., and given clear line of sight of how it's being expended or drawn down.
Okay, that's helpful. Is that all right, Chris? You're muted, Chris.
Right, yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was more about not how the money was being spent or anything like that. It was that we might come up against barriers where the money spent is making a difference, but then that particular work stream has to come to an end, i.e. being if sustainable funding isn't secured elsewhere or outside funding isn't available, that we might have invested well, the outcome might be going well, but it might ground to a halt simply because of funding. And I think somebody was saying, you know, where we've been here 18 months down the line, then we have to start from scratch again and go off there. So if it's tangible, that it's an investment now and an investment for the future, then I think, yeah, that's fine.
I don't think at this stage that any of us are in a position to be able to give long-term guarantees about future funding streams. I think what we do know is that there is a need for improvements in the outcomes. There's a need for some significant investment. This needs to be viewed as the start of that. But you know, at this stage, we're not in any position to give cast iron guarantees. We do have to apply it as a test and learn and try and identify which of the areas are going to be really effective, and then we can come back to some of those longer term decisions when we're in a much better position with some of the evidence around that. So that's what I'd say. There is always going to be a risk that a programme such as this will not have sufficient funding to carry forward everything that we would aspire to do. But actually looking so far ahead, there may be other opportunities, etc. as well that come through. So we wouldn't want to not progress with the view that there may not be future funding streams. We are still hopeful, and we are still lobbying strongly to ensure that SEND gets the priority it needs from a government perspective. And clearly we, along with yourselves, will have to try and, you know, have a look at all of the potential opportunities to drive the improvements that we want to see. I would suggest that we should still progress, and clearly once we start to say that these are the areas that we'd want to see continued and improved, we have an opportunity to look at that upstream, but not sort of trying to maybe take things out of the programme that we may think would be effective because there's a risk that future funding may not be available. It feels as though that's probably not the right approach. So I suggest that we progress on in the way that Alison suggested, with the test and learn and utilise the evidence and really try and think what really works for, you know, for our children and young people, and what's the most effective use of the funds that we do have.
Okay. Sorry, Chris, you're muted again.
Sorry, yeah, I'm totally in agreement with that. You know, that we have to take that risk, if you like, that, you know, things will get going and hopefully funding will come along to supplement it in future, but it is just a case, it is a risk we need to note. I think that's all I'm saying.
Well, and I think we all recognise that the high needs funding area generally is high risk and is likely to be extremely difficult for the foreseeable future. Right, before we proceed to a vote, are there any other questions or comments? Fine. Now, this is a question I should have asked Corinna before the meeting. What's the best way of undertaking a vote in these circumstances? Using the raise hands facility?
Is it worth establishing that anyone will be voting against the recommendation in the report first?
What a very sensible suggestion. Would anybody be voting against? If you can use the raise hands facility. All right. Right.
Career, I've got a question about who can vote.
Comment.
Yeah, it's about who can vote. Can you just establish who can vote? Sorry.
I can't see any reason why all members of the forum can't vote on this one. Clearly officers can't, but all members of the forum, I think, can vote. Okay. In which case, I'm not seeing anybody indicating that they are opposed to the package, recognising all of the concerns and uncertainties. In which case, I will take it that we are the report, interesting form of words, where we are asked to fulfil the transfer of funds. I'll take it that we are content to for the transfer of funds to proceed, but in the expectation that there will be milestone reports in the course of the year, and that they will accumulate a fuller picture of the various issues that we've explored, including the sustainability and effectiveness issues. Thank you for that. I think we're done as far as items 4 and 5 are concerned. Items 6 and 7, as I said at the outset, and as Corinna's note indicated, are both information items. So rather than extend this meeting, the proposal is that you submit any written comments to Corinna, and we will ensure that a coordinated written response to questions raised is produced and circulated. But again, as I said at the outset, please do read those reports. Please do submit questions, because these are important for building blocks for the financial planning that we'll be engaging with in the autumn. In the absence of any other business, I think I can declare the meeting closed, thanking you all for your participation and contributions, and wishing you all the best in these continuing extraordinary circumstances. Right, meeting over.